Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, let's talk about the football though. Let's stay with the city of Munich and Bayern against Leipzig. Um, we both thought this would be a tight affair, and we both were completely wrong. Bayern Munich were impressive, I would say. This was a match that they utterly dominated. It feels like it's a lifetime ago. But it's the Friday fixture always when we do this podcast on a Sunday afternoon, it always feels like it's been a lifetime since the Friday game. But this was the I think the most comprehensive Bayern game that we've seen this season under Vinny Kompany. You can make the point that Leipzig were poor, and yes, they were. You still got to play who's in front of you. I think too, Joshua Kimmich made the point after the Mainz defeat that they now have to really watch it. This is a dangerous moment of the season, right? Made a really big point that they needed a big response, and boy, did they deliver. And Kimmich himself delivered too, right? With a strike from outside the box, a beautiful goal. And so, you really might take away from this match. And, I don't think Bayern Munich have wrapped up the Bundesliga title, and we get to the why when we talk about Leverkusen in a few moments. But, it is a statement victory before the winter break. It really calms things down, doesn't it? In the city of Munich, they can now go into this break with some confidence, knowing that they're in a really good place. It kind of quietened the critics that said that this team wasn't scoring enough goals, because they certainly did in this game. I think too, defensively they were much improved as well. So it's all around. It creates this really good sense of feel good atmosphere at the club. This can change. We don't know how the contract negotiations are going with Kimmich, Davies. Leroy Sané has mentioned that he wanted to stay in Munich after the match. The Jamal Musiala situation, there's a lot of talk about that. I personally think this is literally just something about the date. They just want to wait until January 1st to wrap this up. But there is noise still, but I think Bayern Munich did a really good job quieting a lot of the doubters after this match day.
Yeah, it was a game that I think demanded a response from Bayern Munich. They had to make a statement. They had to make it clear that they're serious about winning this Bundesliga title. And as you said, after the defeat to Mainz last weekend, it was a perfect opportunity to do that. I think that probably played a big part in it. For example, I think if Bayern had won that game last weekend, then maybe they go into this game a little complacent. Maybe they don't have the same kind of fire in their bellies to win it. But obviously, at Bayern Munich, you can't lose 2 games in a row in the Bundesliga, or else it's a disaster. And they came up against a Leipzig side who were just absolutely blown away by them. I watched the game live, and I rewatched most of it today, and I'm honestly struggling to pick like 2 or 3 moments where Leipzig did anything well, aside from that Sesko goal in the second minute. But because obviously Musiala scores straight away, then Sesko scores straight away, and you think, wow, we've really got a game in our hands here. It's going to be a really tight affair. But after that, Bayern just absolutely blew Leipzig away. And I think what really stood out to me was tactically, I thought Bayern were spot on. I thought the players were spot on. It actually reminded me quite a lot of their performance against Leverkusen at the Allianz Arena, where they did more or less everything right except stick the ball in the back of the net. But in this game, they obviously had that ability to do that. Obviously, I thought Musiala was outstanding. I thought Olise was outstanding. I thought Leroy Sané was outstanding. It was a big performance that he needed to show what he was capable of. And I thought he really ran the show in that game. And Leipzig just found themselves kind of chasing shadows for the most part. Making mistakes, constantly giving the ball back to Bayern, really struggling to hold on to the ball at all. And as a result, Bayern just kind of relentlessly went about their possession style of football and picked Leipzig off. And it really was a fantastic performance. There's huge question marks over Leipzig.
Mm-hmm.
I did say on the main show last week, I think, after their win, that they could kind of go to this game and go into this game with no pressure, kind of take their, put their feet up. No one's really expecting anything from them. And I do kind of wonder if that's kind of maybe what seeped into this performance, because it didn't strike me as a Leipzig team who felt an obligation to cause an upset. And this is something that we've kind of, pointed the finger at with Leipzig a few times over the years, where they can raise their game for big matches, and we've seen them do it notably against Leverkusen over the last couple of years. But sometimes as well, it's almost like they shy away from the idea of being the designated team that are going to cause Bayern trouble. They all seem to kind of shirk away from that responsibility of being bona fide title contenders in the Bundesliga. And I think this game was a good example of that, really. And you can draw a comparison between this performance and the one that Leverkusen put in this stadium a few months ago, I want to say, maybe a month ago. And where Leverkusen were dogged and determined to cause an upset in the sense of taking a point, it just felt to me like Leipzig weren't, I don't know, they just weren't as well drilled, or maybe they didn't feel an obligation to take something from this game. I know it's a weird thing to say because it's a contest, it's sport, and it's 11 professionals on the football pitch, and they obviously want to win. But I don't know, I just feel like Marco Rose didn't set his team up in a way to frustrate Bayern, or maybe he did, and Bayern were just too good, and that's totally understandable. But I don't know, it's just weird. I'm trying to. I guess I'm struggling to kind of make my point here in a sense, but I guess from a mentality point of view is maybe what I'm talking about. Leipzig. In fact, Leipzig actually reminded me a lot of Dortmund in the Der Klassikers that we've seen in recent years. Obviously, the last one's an exception, but how many times have we seen Dortmund go to Allianz Arena and quite naively get pulled apart within the first 25, 30 minutes? That's kind of what I saw from Leipzig on Friday night. It was very disappointed in that sense, because obviously we want to see teams rival Bayern. We want to see a good contest. We want to see teams challenging for the title. And whereas Leverkusen, and I guess Frankfurt as well, put out a good performance against Bayern, and of course Dortmund picked up that point at the Westfalenstadion, it just felt to me that this wasn't a very serious performance from Leipzig. And maybe Rosa will say, hey, look, we're just trying to get back on our feet. A few weeks ago, people were talking about him getting sacked, so you can't really go from that to then saying, why aren't you beating Bayern at the Allianz Arena? But I don't know, maybe am I being too harsh here, Manu? I just was very disappointed in Leipzig.
I made this point on the chat that Leipzig were about as solid as a warm butter in the sun. It's
a chocolate teapot.
It felt soft. I feel like this and it's really weird because I've seen a few Leipzig games in Munich, and I've seen a few Bayern games in Leipzig, and usually this is a game that's close. Right, usually it's a contest, and I think two things happened here. It was a game that Bayern Munich took extremely serious. I think Joshua Kimmich again, he came out with the right message and then delivered it. I think this is the more important part. He himself delivered the message, didn't he? But also the Leipzig. I think this Leipzig side showed why they have been struggling in the Champions League this entire season, right? And it really puts into context. I mean, we're not going to talk about it in great length today, but they beat Frankfurt twice in the last 3 games, right? Once in the Pokal and once in the Bundesliga, and that this Frankfurt side is currently showing why they have their own struggles. So this puts the Leipzig results against Frankfurt into a completely different context, and maybe when we were thinking that Leipzig's crisis was quote unquote over, it really wasn't. The same issues still persisted, and the problem with this Leipzig team, and a big part of it is the backline is in shambles, right? Seiwald was playing as a defender in this match. He's not. He's a midfielder. He wasn't signed to be a centre back. Lukeba is out with an injury. Xavi Simons is still out. David Raum came back for this match, and we thought he would make a huge difference. But by the time he comes on, this game is over. But the real difference that you saw in this match, and I actually think both these teams are extremely talented. I think Leipzig, from a talent level, and I have made this point many times on the show, I think that they're one of the most talented teams in this league, maybe even the most talented. But that's on ceiling, right? Like they have a talent base that is extremely high, but a lot of these pieces aren't finished. And I walked away from this game and thinking the difference between those two teams in this match was that one was a team and the other wasn't. Leipzig don't have a team at the moment. This is not, it's a collective of players that are trying to figure it out. whether it's Openda up front, Šeško, I mean the two I think combined for the goal, which I thought was really nice. But they're not solid because they don't have the collective power to withstand pressure. And when they face adversity and they face a team that is a little bit better drilled than them, and I think this Bayern side is actually quite well drilled. And this is one thing that Kompany has figured out very quickly, right? He's really made a unit out of this team. And yeah, this team is still full of flaws. We've talked about it. We've talked about some of the shortcomings in attack. We've talked about the lack of depth in the wing back positions. I mean, Davies comes back for this match. I think he made a huge difference. He scores, right? But you can just tell that this team is better when Davies is on the field. But the problem is you can't play. They can play so many games now. You can't play him every game, right? And that's where you see this discrepancies between the two. But I mean, it really boils down to this one thing. Bayern Munich played like a team. They have pretty much for a long time now under Vincent Kompany. They no longer look like this collection of individuals. They do actually look like they're all pulling in the same direction. And Leipzig don't. They pull into all sorts of directions because I think there's a bunch of confused players there. I think too, and I mean this is important context, especially for Marco Rose, the head coach, and he made a big point about this after the game. The terror attack in Magdeburg that is just 40-45 kilometers away from Leipzig. The day off, right? Rose is from the region. That is something that impacts him. But, at the same time, you can say, okay, yeah, the terror impacted us and the players, etc. But, they've been playing like this for, 6-7 games now? This isn't a new thing, Stefan.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty excuse for what was a very serious and, absolutely shocking scenes. But yeah, I mean, looking at the stats and kind of looking at the way that Leipzig is set up, there's a huge Xavi Simons hole in this team. I've got like their average positionings open in front of me, and Bayern's is very uniform. Everyone's in the position they should be. The Bayern average at 11 is basically how they would be set up on a training pitch if they're doing like a passing exercise. You look at the Leipzig one, and it's basically 5 players squished in front of each other, and right in front of the Bayern box. The Leipzig box. You've then got on the right hand side Baumgartner and Sieval. For some reason, Henrik spent most of the game actually in the middle of the pitch, which is quite interesting. And then you have this huge gap between those kind of 8 players, and then Nusa, Openda, and Šeško up front. And I was just kind of looking at some interesting stats in terms of, because the thing that really stood out to me in this game was constantly how much Bayern just completely turned the ball over, how much they took the ball off Leipzig. And sure enough, over the course of the match, Šeško lost the ball 5 times, Openda lost the ball 5 times, Nusa lost the ball 7 times. And that's in comparison to Musiala losing it twice, Kane losing it 3 times, Olise losing it twice. And I think the issue there is that, like, whenever these guys did actually get on the ball, they had no one to pass to. They could maybe pass to each other, but it's, two or three guys up against a back line of 4 or 5 players, and he just constantly lost the ball. Bayern picked up relatively easily and just went back to business. And so basically you've got this unit of like 8 players trying to defend against Bayern. You then have 3 guys up front who are isolated, and there's nobody in between. And that's exactly where Xavi Simons would be in this situation, obviously. And I know we've kind of been saying this over and over and over again, how much they miss Xavi Simons, but they need to have someone else in there. I mean, I know, Marco Rose has tried a bunch of different options, and obviously Bob Gardner is one who kind of can play at number 10 position. Doesn't have the real kind of same finesse as Xavi Simons, but he's a kind of box-to-box player. I thought he was pretty disappointing on Friday night, to be honest with you. He just wasn't capable of kind of providing that link between the midfield and attack. And that's just what caused Leipzig problems time and time again, and why Bayern were able to ultimately dominate this match, because Leipzig just couldn't keep a hold of the ball. And that's what led to Bayern just picking them off and winning the game quite comfortably.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, there's the story is almost bigger about Leipzig than Bayern, isn't it? And fans will not want to hear that, because again they've been so great, but and as great as Bayern Munich was in this match, it is really such a such a, how do I say this the right way? It just laid open all these problems with this Leipzig team, didn't it? And I looked at the average positioning here on the Bundesliga app as you were talking, and just to kind of underline it, right? And it's just so very telling how deep they were, and then I looked at the Bayern average line. I mean, Daniel Perez spent most of his game as a goalkeeper outside the box. It's just, and that's crazy. I mean, that's just nuts. And I think that that is, I think, something that when they are going to talk about in the winter break at Leipzig, that is something that they will heavily look at. And I think this team needs some strengthening of the squad. And there's a lot of work ahead for when Jurgen Klopp starts his position on January 1st. I think this is going to be one of his key projects, getting this Leipzig side going. And for Bayern Munich, it quietens everything down. This is just, perfect for them. They can now, their players can go on their respective holidays to, Mallorca, wherever, Middle East, etc., and then come back in January and reassemble. And it just gives also Max Eber, I think, the opportunity to work quietly. And I personally think they're going to do something, because there is still problems. One thing that we need to talk about, Stefan, is how quiet Harry Kane was again in this game. This is maybe the one factor. We said it before, when he comes back from injuries, he has problems coming back from injuries usually. He was really quiet in this match, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. And I mean, I don't want to kind of labour the point, because I don't want Bayern Munich fans to think, we're just kind of picking on negatives after what was a good performance. But yeah, he was really quiet. I thought, I mean, to an extent, he kind of plays a role, maybe even if it is off the ball, where he obviously dictates so much of how Leipzig defend and what their defenders are focusing on. But it was definitely a game in which Musiala, Michael Olise, and Leroy Sané more or less just passed the ball between the three of them, and Harry Kane did struggle to get onto it. I think he only had 4 shots in this game, maybe 2 on target. There was 1 or 2 where you think he really should have been scoring now, he should be doing better. And we said in the previous show to this that, he's probably not 100% fit, which is completely understandable. And he's one of those players that really struggles when he's not 100% fit. So I'm kind of willing to give him the benefit of the doubt here. And based on the fact that, Bayern won the game, it was other players who won it for them. So we don't really have to labour the point, really. But yeah, you're right. I thought he was relatively poor. And if Bayern hadn't got something from this game, I think he'd probably been one of the main culprits to kind of point the finger at in terms of why they struggled. But I would definitely say they won in spite of him, which is maybe a pretty mean thing to say when a team wins 5-1. But yeah, it was another kind of, I mean, we're joking with our subscribers, weren't we, that it's absolutely bonkers that Bayern can score 5 goals and Harry Kane still couldn't get one of them. And that kind of running theme of him not scoring goals in big games does continue. But yeah, I think in this case, we'll give him a bye, since Bayern won this one. They won it comfortably. He's coming back from injury. Yeah, we'll see what happens after the winter break when he's back to full fitness, because they'll have big games then as well.